I want to share a few thoughts about this week's Torah portion, and actually, we recognize the fact that this week we are concluding the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus. Next week, we begin with the book of Bamidbar. In Hebrew, Bamidbar means in the wilderness or in the desert, and in English, it's called Numbers, because of how the Sefer begins, how the book begins. But this week I want to think a little bit about the transition between these two books. Because for the last couple of months, as we have delved into the book of Vayikra, we've focused in the beginning on the laws and the duties of the Kohanim, of the priests. As we moved later on and through the book of Vayikra, these last number of weeks with Parashat Kedoshim, we start looking at the laws and the obligations of all of us as an Am Kadosh, as a holy people, not just the Kohanim. And that is now finishing with this section of Behar and Bechukotai. It's actually a double portion this week, but I'm going to focus on Bechukotai. It's finishing with Bechukotai, and then next week we go into Bamidbar, we go into the wilderness. And I guess for me, this transition is a really vital one for us, because it asks implicitly and then answers, I think, explicitly the question, how do we face a wilderness? How do we face Bamidbar, knowing that we're going to be wandering in the desert for 40 years, that is going to be our existence for a significant amount of time? How do we face that not knowing what the next day is going to bring, that discomfort of knowing that our life is to some degree in flux with the uncertainties that wilderness living leaves us? Obviously, a poignant question for today, as we are asking some of those very same questions. So I want to look at two different aspects of Bechukotai to help us answer that. The first aspect is actually one of the more uncomfortable and scary aspects of all of this. And that is the fact that Bechukotai has within it a section that is called the Tochacha. And there's a number of times this occurs within our Torah, but the Tochacha literally means rebuke. And it is a series of consequences. It is a series of things that will happen according to our text if we don't follow God's word, if we don't continue to connect and be part of the covenant that we have promised to be part of. These are the things that are going to happen. And they're scary. They are a whole series of all of the things that could possibly go wrong will go wrong. And one of the things that, to me, one of the aspects to this, as we read through this, that is the most poignant, is a very famous section. For those who happen to have it in front of you, you can turn to Leviticus chapter 26. That's where the Tochacha can be found. And it begins verse 23. So that's on page 750 if you have the red Eitz Chaim Chumash. But I want to look on page 751. I want to look at verse 37. Verse 37 reads as follows. All of these things will happen. Let's go back a couple of verses. As for those of you who survive, I'm on verse 36. As for those of you who survive, all of these bad things that are going to happen, I will cast a faintness into their hearts in the land of their enemies. The sound of a driven leaf shall put them to flight. Fleeing as though from the sword, they shall fall through none, though none pursues. And then verse 37, with no one pursuing, they shall stumble over one another as before the sword. You shall not be able to stand before your ground stand your ground before your enemies. It is not my intention today, by any stretch of the imagination, to say that the things that we are going through with COVID is because of this. That's a whole other theological conversation that we can have at another time. But what I want to talk about is the results when there is stress, when there is times of challenge. What happens? There is this sense of panic. There is this sense of fear. And it reads, as it says here, the sound of a driven leaf, the slightest little sound will make us jump, will make us be afraid. But verse 37, the beginning of this verse, has become quite famous. With no one pursuing, they shall stumble over one another. Now, why has that become famous? They shall stumble over one another has been picked up by the Midrash and by the Talmud to actually be the origin of one of the most powerful maxims that we have within our tradition. It reads as follows: they shall stumble over one another, one because of another. This teaches that Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Bazeh, that every one in Israel, every person is responsible one for the other. It is this part of the Tochacha, it is this verse that is that basic statement of responsibility that we have for one another. And it starts it in the negative, when we aren't responsible for one another. We are stumbling over one another because all we are doing is thinking of ourselves, as opposed to being able to say, I have a responsibility not only for myself, but for every single other person within my community. All of a sudden then, we're not stumbling over each other anymore. We're talking to one another. We're thinking about what it is that we need to do. We're focusing together as a community to address the issues, the challenges, and the problems. They become much less, I don't know the word I want, they become much less of a mountain and a little bit more of a small hill that we can overcome. So that's the first piece that I want us to think about. How do we face the wilderness? How do we face that unknown? We face it by knowing that we are each responsible for one another, that we each have an obligation to other members in our community. When we do that, the wilderness becomes much less scary because we begin to have trust that the other people around us are going to be there to protect us and have our back as well, just like we would for them. So that's the first aspect of this transition that I think is so important. The second comes in the opening verse of Bechukotai, and it's back on page 747. And it reads, Im bechukotai telechu, ve'et mitzvotai tishmeru, ve'asitem otam. If you follow my laws and faithfully observe my commandments, then all of these good things are going to happen. Now, what's interesting is this first verse has a couple of interesting aspects to it. There are 3 different verbs that are in this verse if we really look at it. Im bechukotai telechu, if in my laws you shall lech, you shall walk, you shall go. Ve'ed mitzvotai tishmeru, and my commandments you shall keep or guard or watch or observe, depending on how you want to translate that. Ve'asitem otam, and you shall do them, and you do them. So we have to go or to walk is the verb. We have to guard or to keep, and we have to do. And Ibn Ezra, one of our Middle Ages commentators, picks up on that, and he connects each one of these verbs to an aspect of what it is that we and how it is that we are supposed to approach the law and approach our tradition. He writes, Im bechukotai tishmeru va'asitem, right? He quotes that section. Mitzvah lilmod ulilamed ula'asot. He says there are actually three different aspects, three different actions that we have to take into account. And when we think about our tradition, when we think about our community, these three aspects are important. The first is we're required to study, to learn. The second, we are required to teach. And then, third, we are required to do. So how do we look at this to face the wilderness, to face the unknown? Ibn Ezra is giving us a powerful technique and a powerful path forward. First, we as individuals need to learn as much as we can. We need to be knowledgeable. We need to be knowledgeable so that when we face those challenges, we are able to draw on that knowledge to create a response. That's the first step, lilmod, to learn. Second, lilamed. It's not enough that we ourselves know, we have to teach. And this goes back to what I was speaking about at the beginning. Since Kol Yisrael Aravim Zeh Bazeh, since every Jew is responsible one for the other, we need to make sure that everyone around us knows what they need to know. And finally, la'asot. We need to do it. It's not enough to talk the talk, we have to walk the walk. And that means that if we have learned something new about our tradition, it's time for us to go out and to give that a try. And now's a great opportunity. As we're learning, as we're studying, as we're growing, let's expand our practice as well when it comes to our own tradition. Certainly when it comes to the challenges that we're facing today, it's not enough just to say, oh, I understand that we're supposed to wash our hands, and I need to teach those people around me that we're supposed to wash our hands, but we actually have to wash our hands. We have to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. And the last little piece, and then I'll end with this today, is there's a Hasidic teaching on this particular verse. Because the last word, otam, for those who read Hebrew, if you have it in front of you, you'll notice it's vocalized otam, but the vav, the second letter, is actually missing. And if you didn't have vowels there and you just saw that word, you would actually read it as atem, not otam. Now in context, it clearly means otam, that we shall keep them, right? Va'asitem otam, you shall do those commandments. But the Hasidic text picks up on it and reads it without the vav and says, Va'asitem atem. Not somebody else, but you, atem. You're the ones that are supposed to do it. We don't wait for somebody else to come along. We are the ones that have to actually go out and do these actions. And I think it's a wonderful Hasidic teaching. So once again, how do we face the unknown of a wilderness? First, we understand that our actions have consequences. That's the tochacha part of all of this. The rebuke. If we don't do the things we're supposed to, there are consequences to the actions. Two, that we are all responsible, each for one another. And when we recognize that, when we celebrate that, when we actually live our lives with that as one of our platforms, then we take care of one another. We feel the confidence of that, and our community thrives. And finally, when we learn things, it's not enough just to learn it and to understand it, but we need to teach, we need to do, we need to follow the guidance, we need to follow the actions that we learn from our tradition and from the world that is around us. It is a powerful way to think about looking at uncertainty, knowing that while we don't have all the answers, we do have tools at our disposal that'll help us face the challenges that come ahead. Shabbat Shalom.